Welcome to the Football365 Isolation Show. I'm your host, as ever, Mark Smith, and I'm joined by Matt Stead, Deputy Editor of Football365. How are you, Matt?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark. The weather's a bit miserable, but getting by. How about you?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Weather's bad, so just stay in and watch this, and then if you like it, watch it again, I guess. We'll get straight into it. Hakeem from Sri Lanka. Pretty exciting. Hakeem from Sri Lanka, he talks about Paul Pogba and David De Gea. He says, I was always in the camp of getting things done ASAP and then build for the future with the core that you've put together. However, that was pre-pandemic. This is all about Man United, obviously. My position personally was to sell Pogba, sell De Gea, get value, and then build for the future. Unfortunately, we may not be able to get the value for Pogba and De Gea that we should get this window. The solution is simple. Do not sell. He goes on to say that from what I can see, United are uniquely placed to spend and bring in a marquee signing without having to raise the funds entirely from sales. So why not hold off selling two key assets in what is likely to be a deflated market, have them play and regain form and value, and then cash in next summer. On the flip side, take a hit on the likes of Lingard, Pereira, Rojo, Jones, Smalling and Sanchez, bring in 50 mil for the lot of them. Clubs will be more receptive to taking in these big-ish names if we give them a bargain, given most clubs' current financial plight. Okay, so his main crux there is he would personally like to keep Pogba and De Gea because of the change in market valuations. I mean, Matt, where do you stand on this? I mean, these are two key players to United in theory, you know, huge money signings, big assets. Are they that important to this first 11 anymore?
I think in terms of Pogba, his importance has definitely dwindled with obviously signing Bruno Fernandes. That's kind of taken a lot of the weight off Pogba's shoulders in terms of what he needs to deliver in midfield. In terms of De Gea, I think the issue with De Gea is he's not really ever had any sort of competition at United. Because they signed Miro about 5 years ago and they signed him with the sole purpose of being a backup keeper. And even then, when he's played Europa League, when he's played in the League Cup, FA Cup, he's been brilliant, but he's never really been considered as kind of competition for De Gea. He's kind of, it's a vague kind of thing where he's going to set a certain standard, and De Gea will always be above that in terms of what Romero can do. Whereas now, I think with Dean Henderson, obviously at Sheffield United, that changes that dynamic completely because he's obviously a lot younger than De Gea. I think he's 24, so he's got a fair few years on him.
And that's a baby in goalkeeping terms, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You can get a good 10 years or so out of him. If he kind of keeps playing at the standard he is now at Sheffield United, you can get a good decade out of that.
Yeah.
And obviously, it would be a risk in terms of kind of slotting him straight into that first team because he's only had one season of Premier League football. He's had a brilliant season of Premier League football, but when you kind of account for Champions League, when you account for international football, he's not been capable.
And the pressure generally of playing for a much bigger team. No offense to Sheffield United, but United are a world renowned team. It's for a position, particularly that goalkeeper, which is so much in your own head. I think you don't know until you try it at that level. So it is a risk, like you say.
It is, yeah. Like you say, it's a different challenge. It is where you can kind of be that big fish in a small pond at Sheffield United. You've got a lot of saves to make. Obviously, it's not like a relegation battling team where they're going to be defending for their lives every week. They're a brilliant team and they're tactically innovative. You can kind of put them against any team and they can beat them. But it's a different kind of challenge to be a Sheffield United keeper, to be a Man United keeper, where they're expected to attack, they're expected to keep possession, they're expected to be on that front foot, whereas Sheffield United not so much.
Yeah. How much has De Gea's stock fallen in the last couple of seasons? Because there still are. At the start of his career, there were a lot of doubters. They said he wasn't quite right for this club. He was too young, full of too many mistakes. And then I think he probably had 3 seasons where if he wasn't the best keeper in the world, he was certainly in the conversation, certainly in the top 2 or 3. And now these mistakes have crept in again a little bit. Do you think now is the right time? His stock has plummeted, but he certainly still holds some value, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's still, I think he's got 3 years on his contract, so it's not like they're in a rush to sell him, whereas with Pogba, I think he's only got 1 year. They've got an option after that to extend that again. But with De Gea, he's got a fair bit of time left on his contract, so you've got a bit of value there. in terms of his
but also
performances.
in terms of Hakim, his email, he says that obviously the market has changed post COVID, but it changed for everybody. So you might get less for Pogba or De Gea, but equally the players you're buying will be less as well. So it's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah, it has a knock-on effect on everyone. I'd love to see his working out in terms of getting 50 million for Pereira and Smalling and everyone like that. I don't think there's any chance of that happening at all. I think it will be, if anyone does move, it'll be your Sanchos and it'll be players of that kind of ilk, Timo Werner, that kind of player, and the rest maybe player exchanges or something like that. Otherwise, you're not going to get that value. Like you say, it's affecting every club. There's no difference to anyone, really.
No, of course. But potentially, I mean, we talked about De Gea on field. Pogba, is he more valuable to them as an asset just off the field? Is he? I mean, if you go to United, his face is all over the megastore. He is their number one global guy, isn't he? Everyone knows who that is. When they bought him, they were buying essentially buying a brand. Yeah, there's no good in buying what is essentially a brand for a club and then complaining that he's too egocentric. That's what you knew what you were buying. When he's playing well, he's fantastic, but he's not quite consistent enough. This season's been a write-off with injury. But off the field, isn't he worth keeping hold of?
And in terms of marketability, I think United, when they signed him, they were that kind of club. They were bringing in that wasn't only a couple of years after like Di Maria was signed and Falcao was signed, where they were bringing in these kind of superstar names, these big, not egos, but big characters, big, like you say, players who have basically got their own followings away from kind of club.
Yeah, I think I don't mean egotistical. I mean it's more he's his own. He is his own entity, right? It's not so much as a person that I think he is, vain or anything like that, or thinks it's all about him and not part of the team. I think he's an excellent team player, actually. And I don't want to go all Souness on the show. He is someone who. He has just he brings with him a lot of baggage. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is like I say. It's kind of. I think United have moved on from that kind of player. He is a good team player, and he does get a lot of flack, and a lot of it is unfair. Some of it is. Yeah. It's kind of it's a fair critique because I think he'd admit himself that it's not been a good 4 years on either side. I don't think United have lived up to their bargain in terms of challenging for trophies, challenging for titles, and I don't think he's lived up to his end of it either in terms of consistency, in terms of performance.
Yeah, this is the frustrating thing because if he went to, Real's been mentioned a lot. If he went there, I think you'd see him flourish in a team that would be maybe more suited to him in a league that is certainly less competitive, and you'd see the best of Paul Pogba. I want to see that Pogba here because I want to see the best players in our division, and he is undoubtedly, in terms of ability, there's not many in the world that can do what Pogba can. It's just that if he's only doing it one in every 4 or 5 games, you're not really seeing the best of him. You're certainly not getting your money's worth on the pitch. Anyway, let's move on. I think Hakim, do we agree with him then, generally? Do not sell?
It's a big risk because I think in terms of his argument, you're keeping him in the first team and you're hoping that they play to a standard where their value does keep or their value does kind of get a bit higher. Whereas if you take this season in that context and you repeat it again in terms of Pogba, say, if you do that, then he gets an injury halfway through. His performances are still inconsistent. He's not giving his best to United, so his value is not going to keep. His value is going to drop. So it's that risk in terms of do they sell now if they can get a buyer. I don't think they will be able to be honest. I don't think any club will be offering that kind of money for someone who can't guarantee those performances. Like you say, it would be nice to see Pogba kind of the Pogba at Juventus, where he was kind of playing alongside Pirlo, playing alongside those midfielders. He was dominant. He was winning trophies left, right, and centre. He was an absolutely brilliant player. Whereas now, I think it's probably. I think we've seen too much of him. I think the problem is that we see him every week now. Whereas when it was him playing in Juventus, you'd see clips of him doing brilliant
highlight reel. The highlight reel was unbelievable.
Exactly, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see what happens then, Hakim. I'm afraid we can't give you any answers. Fingers crossed for you, though. Right, moving on, we've got an email from Aaron Grimes. Now, Aaron Grimes here is replying to an email from earlier in the week that suggested Liverpool had the best defensive midfielder in the league in Fabinho. He says, well, that's a strange email. I don't remember Liverpool pushing through a transfer for Kante or Fernandinho. Or is it that Fabinho, who was schooled by Billy Gilmore, that you're talking about? Because Fabinho doesn't make the top 3 in the league. The podium places would go to Kante, Fernandinho and Ndidi. Aaron Grimes, you've opened a can of worms there, my friend. This claim that Fabinho isn't in the top 3 defensive mids in the league, Matt Stead, is that nonsense?
It is nonsense.
It's not. It's got to be, right? It's got to be.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's kind of recency bias, because in terms of at the start of the season, Fabinho was arguably the best player in the Premier League overall, never mind midfielders. But then he got his injury obviously around winter time. I think it was around December. And Liverpool, obviously their form kind of carried on. They were just machining through everyone. But the performances, you could tell there was a bit of a notable kind of dip in terms of what they were producing in midfield, their defensive output. They weren't quite as resolute, quite as sure as they were when he was there. So I think, and since he's come back as well, to be fair, he's not been brilliant. He's not been at that standard that he set at the start of the season, but that standard was far and above what anyone else has been able to do this season.
Would you classify Jordan Henderson as a defensive mid?
That's the difficulty, isn't it, with Liverpool midfielders? Because none of them are really attacking midfielders. Because you've got that front 3, and you don't need an attacking midfielder. You can have the 3 workhorses. You can have Henderson, Wijnaldum, you can have Fabinho. Oxlade-Chamberlain's a bit different when he plays. Keita, again, he's kind of one of those players who'll kind of float in between the lines. He can link them up a little bit better in terms of midfield and attack. But I don't know, in terms of defensive midfielders, I think you're looking at Fabinho. And if
give us some more names then, Matt. Who else makes up your top 3?
I mean, top 3, I don't think, if you're basing it on this season, you can't have Kante, because if we're talking about inconsistency, this has been his worst season in England by far.
I don't think he's been great since the World Cup.
No, I think you're probably right. I think he's had a couple of injury problems. Obviously, Sarri kind of changed his position a little bit, and Lampard's carried that on to an extent. So I don't think you can have him. I think, again, if you're doing it in terms of this season, you can't have Fernandinho because he's been playing at centre half. So
okay, well, let's broaden it then. We need to have players who we know can play that position and can specialise in that position, and who let's be positive for once on the show and pick them at their best. So players that are still playing and we know are capable of. Kante is not burnt out. We know that. We know he can still produce. Yeah. So I mean, who's the top 3? You're giving reasons there why Kante can't be at the minute, but I think that if we go by this new broader criteria, Kante surely is still one of the top 3 in the league, isn't he?
Yeah, if you're gonna change the rules here, Mark, on the fly, yeah, we'll let Kante can sneak in. We'll have
Patrick Vieira, of course.
Yeah, Vieira. Yeah, Keane,
really broadening this out.
Yeah, I think you'd have to have Fabinho. I'll let you have Kante. That'll be generous. And then I think Aaron Grimes, although he is clearly an idiot, does have a point on Ndidi, because he is, in terms of defensive midfielders, I think he's the only challenger to Fabinho at the minute.
Yeah, indeed. There's some more names I've got written down here, which you tell me I'm an idiot. Jorginho, who is a defensive mid, but not a classical one, not a Makelele or Fabinho type. He's someone who he sits deeper, but he's not necessarily a physical shield, is he? He's more of a, I hate the phrase because it's not our sport, but sort of more of a quarterback sort of role.
Yeah, it's similar to Henderson in terms of I was going to say Ruben Neves as well.
He's in my list. You don't let me get to his bloody list.
Well, there you go. Great mind. Because you wouldn't kind of think of him in terms of making tackles, in terms of making interceptions, blocks, and everything like that. You don't kind of classify them in terms of what they do defensively, whereas you do consider them in terms of their passing, their ability in terms of that.
Well, Moutinho from the same team as well. I mean, he could be in the list, couldn't he?
Similar definitely. Sort of they do. Yeah, him and Neves do similar jobs, don't they? Yeah.
Rodri has had a pretty mixed bag of a first season, but I think we'd agree that he has the potential to be something pretty special. A player that I want to mention, and I think if we talked about this a year ago, you'd have laughed me off the show, and rightly so. Fred at Man United, I think, has... If there was an award for most improved player in the league, I think he'd be in with a shout. I think he's been sensational this season.
Absolutely, yeah. He's kicked on massively, and it's one of the things we criticise Solskjaer for in terms of he doesn't really improve players. He's signed, the players he's signed have been brilliant, and they've improved the squad overall. He signed Maguire, Wan-Bissaka, Fernandes, obviously we've seen recently. In terms of the players he brings in, he does improve the squad. Whereas I think one of the criticisms against him is that he's not a good enough coach to raise the standard of players he inherited. Whereas, like you say, you do see this season Fred as being absolutely brilliant. He's kicked on to such an extent that I think when you look at United's midfield, you're looking at Fernandes, you're looking at, if they can play together, Pogba.
Yeah.
And then if you want that third player, I personally would try and, if I was in any sort of position of authority at United, which would be horrible. But yeah, I would personally push for Ndidi. But I don't think Leicester would sell him. I think he'd be far too much, especially in this current market, like we were saying. So I think now, definitely, and I think as a backup, if they ever do improve that position, I think Fred, he more than fits the bill.
Yeah, another player they got at United who I think Solskjaer has improved is McTominay, but I don't think he's quite at that level yet to have him anywhere near the top 3 defensive mids in the league, is he?
No, I think McTominay I think it's important to have in terms of that kind of Darren Fletcher kind of role. And
he's a complete Ferguson player, isn't he? He's exactly what he'd have been in a Ferguson squad for 15 years. He'd have won 6 league titles, and it would have gone down with 450 appearances.
Exactly, and it's such a lazy comparison to say he is the next Darren Fletcher because he is a Scottish Manchester
blonde
United
Scottish man.
Exactly, yeah. But it's just it does, and you need players like that. You can't have just 11 first teamers and then that's it.
Absolutely.
You can't have that kind of squad. So you do need that kind of player in there, and we've seen him like perform that kind of role to a brilliant degree in terms of like even United's last game, that game against City, scoring that goal there.
Yeah,
he's had some absolutely excellent performances before. So I think there's definitely a place for him. I don't think he's a regular starter by any means, but I don't think he was ever meant to be honest.
No. Right, Matt Stead, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for being here yet again. This time next week, football's back. Football's actually back.
Actual football.
I know, actual real British UK football, saluting the Queen and all who sail in her. Right. Until then, email the show. It's at theeditor@football365.com. Get in touch with us. Let us know if you hate us, if you like us, what you think about just football in general, and we will respond to your emails. Until then, I've been Mark Smith. That's been Matt Stead. Goodbye.